everyone joining us again for another Grip Berkman Coaches Cafe, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. For the last several months, we've been looking at articles related to body life values, and we finally start to bring this to a focus on accomplishing. All of these values that we've been talking about are pointing to helping us to be more productive for the kingdom of Christ. And today we have John Blake, the team leader for Grip Berkman Leadership Team and a longtime coach with Grip Berkman, and the leader of, he's the Change Management, is that your title still, John? Change Management Consultant, or have they changed it again?
We just like to change it up. So now it's organizational transformation, but it's essentially the same thing.
Arose by any other name.
There you go.
Working with the Providence Health System out of Portland, Oregon. So, John, I want to just dive right into the conversation here as we talk about this. But well, John, this article is where things start to really hit the wheel. And as you presented to us these 5 teams that don't quite make it, you talked about specifically these teams fail. Failure meaning to miss the mark. They may think they're accomplishing good things, but at the end of the day, they're not getting to where they really need to be, or they're not being as productive as they ought to be, or they're not really seeing fruitfulness. So I'd like to just kind of begin with, if you don't mind, just kind of an overview of the whole idea of how I'm assuming that you really were this coach that was wandering around all over the world and observing teams. These are observations you have made. How you came to make this distinction that there are these specific 5
I think
that are failing.
As I began to think through where teams stall, or if where they begin to have their points of frustration, I began to think through those that feel like they're stalling, and sometimes those that don't feel like they're stalling, but yet they're not seeing the results that they would expect, that others would expect from them, and began to then backtrack from that and simply say, what is it that typically has been happening, and how does that occur in teams? And ultimately, I think all of these point to spiritual fruit. Are we seeing a building of the body of Christ, either in extreme depth or in breadth? And really, it's always both. If any team should be doing both of those things, both going deeper as well as going wider in their spiritual fruit. And so these are just 5 that stand out. You could probably add others. I'm sure that as we open it up for conversation, there will be some others that may come out that we'll want to talk through. But these are the ones that I most frequently see.
Yeah, and I want to try and help distinguish between them, because I see a lot of overlap, similarities sometimes in them. But I like the way that you've made a certain distinction, and I think I have observed some similar things in teams that I have worked with over the course of the years. Let's just start right off with the Navel Gazers. This is the team where they're really committed to each other. They might even be getting the unity thing, right? But for some reason, their wonderful warmth toward each other and their unity toward each other is just not producing fruit. And why is that?
Well, or it could just be going deep, right? If we're thinking deep and wide, they may just simply be going deep in their relationship with each other, but not forcing themselves to have an outward perspective, to have a view of what else or who is the Lord calling us to in this. And so they become so committed to their unity, so committed to potentially even the one or two things that they do really well, that they lose the opportunities to find out how they could include others, how they could bring others in, how they can reach out effectively. And so with that, they become extremely insulary. I think we see this sometimes
Yeah.
on mission teams that become just focused on relationships, but they don't know how to drive the relationships to a place of having a conversation that's leading people to Christ, that's creating transformation. In the States, we see this a lot of times in churches where they've become accepting of of just who they are. Well, this is sort of our niche. This is our demographic of who we reach out to, and so they become okay with being a church that only does this or only does that, and it becomes very inward, isolated focus rather than kingdom growth, really than spiritual fruit.
Yeah, in fact, I have known teams like this where, their theme was they didn't like conflict, they loved harmony. And so it was, the more we get together, the happier we'll be. And so let's just keep getting together more and more. But ultimately, their purpose, if we really defined it, was just to get together.
Mm.
Um, you were going to say something else about that, John? What?
Well, I think part of these then is what do you do to break them out of it? What
Yeah.
is so compelling then that would lead them to do something different? And I think as we're thinking of coming alongside these teams or observing this in teams that we're at, what is it that becomes so compelling that causes us to then do something different? And uh, I think there's a risk then that someone has to take to start to call out different things. One would simply be, who are the people around us? Who are the people that you're noticing that you feel that uh, you're uh, that you're called to, that might be outside of this group? And if we haven't been seeing growth in an extended amount of time, why not? What's missing in some of that? And really posing some of those hard questions that will cause them to have to reevaluate things in a different way.
So is this just a matter of helping them to broaden their perspective, opening their eyes more to the world around them?
Well, in Grit Berkman terms, I think this is that we don't get hung up on team styles. It's that we understand that there are bodybuilding rules for a reason.
There you go.
And if we haven't leaned into the bodybuilding roles, into this idea that we all have a part to play in the Great Commission, then it's really easy to get focused in on simply being connected to each other rather than understanding the bodybuilding roles call us to deepening and widening. So individually, I play a part in that, and collectively, we play a part in that as well.
And this could be like, if you made the reference to Matthew 28, this could be just being focused on Jerusalem and forgetting that there's Judea, Samaria, and uttermost parts of the world where we really need to be seeing all of it at once,
Yeah, or focused in on we're just living inside the temple walls and we're
just
not
inside
really
the
even paying
temple.
attention to Jerusalem.
Yeah. All right, the next one is Jack of all teams. I assume that's a play on Jack of all trades. That this team thinks they can do absolutely everything, and it's okay to do a little bit of everything and not excel at anything. Is that right?
Um, yeah, they're extremely responsive to whatever the need is. So this is where these teams start to overlap, right? I would say the busy season Ds are the ones that try to do everything. The jack of all teams is sort of that handyman. I think of an app I have on my phone right now, where you can just find a handyman and he'll do anything from switching a light bulb for you to, redoing your bathroom for you. And it's this one guy that really believes that, you know what, I can do it all. What do you need me to do? That's who I'll be today. and they really don't have a ground, they don't have a foundation in where they're going. They're simply responsive to whatever's there, whatever that need is. Okay, I'm going to be responsive to it. I'm going to pursue that for today because that's where the wind's blowing today.
Which means they really have no plan, and and you pointed out that the problem is they're just not able to say no. Anytime someone rises up with a need, they try to address it
Mhm.
themselves.
And it leads then, again, if we go back to some of the ideas that we know, some of the liabilities that we've discussed within the Grit Berkman realm, the problem with not being able to say no is that they then have no boundaries. And when we think of no boundaries as a team and the impact of no boundaries on a team, it's partially burnout, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
going to see that across the board. You're going to feel this heightened sense of expectation. We'll talk about that in a little bit in the next one. But this, if somebody says there's a need, but then you also have this idea of I don't know. I don't know my own boundaries of what I can actually do well and where I actually excel and where I'm just committed to serving. And that, a great volunteer is not one that always raises his hand. A great volunteer is a person that raises their hand when they know that they can add value in a unique way that others can't into a given ask. And I think that this jack of all teams has enough of an understanding of where they should be leaning in and not trying to be all things to all people.
One of the coaches on our call today, I will quote, learned fairly recently in the last few years that no is also a spiritual word. And so having those parameters can help us to say no, because every time we say yes to anything, we are automatically saying no to other things. And that means we could be saying yes to things that take up our time and our priorities that keep us from doing the things we really ought to be doing, that would be more productive for the kingdom, right?
I think the other thing that comes with this, Larry, that we'll experience a lot of times is um, the lack then of how do we actually fit together? The idea of alignment. You have nothing that's actually drawing you together outside of we say yes, outside of we're just responsive, and that becomes tough, right? And so there's not anything to align yourselves off of, as well as then uh, in overall accomplishing. Really, then you become the things that you have to measure are how many times did we respond? And
Hmm.
again, that's not a focal thing. That's simply a we've been busy. We've helped a lot of different people in a lot of different areas, rather than owning the fact that sometimes handing things off is really a powerful thing. I'll never forget. In my master's program, I had a PhD that was an outstanding professor, and she had been invited in to offer a presentation around generation gaps in the workplace and their impact in teams. And she was teaching adult learning and organizational development. And when she said, I turned it down at the time. I was one of those where I loved any opportunity to present. I was like, why would you turn down that opportunity? She's like, well, it's not my niche. It's not my area of expertise. And so I wanted to find somebody that could do it more effectively than I could have. And
Yeah.
it really highlighted for me that in teams, when we get this mentality, or in churches, when we get this mentality of I can do everything, then it's the same as a authoritarian leader that's saying I'm going to do all of it, rather than paying attention to the other teams that may be around, or the other organizations that functionally could be more effective at that than we could be if we would actually narrow down and take a realistic view at where we're actually strong, what we can actually valuably contribute.
All right, the next one kind of goes to another extreme with that, the shoulds and oughts, where you said that their plan, when they've got a strategic plan, they stick to it so religiously that it keeps them from being able to be effective. Explain to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think this one, I see Nate on the call. I think I see this one most often in networks and in places where we have volunteer teams. This is one where our plan, what we believe we should do in order to to accomplish whatever the vision is, that drives us so hard that you'll hear this, well, if we should be doing this, we ought to be doing this in order to accomplish this. And what it does is it puts the all of the focus into that strategic plan, into the shoulds and oughts, and it negates it downplays the role of individuals. It downplays the
Mm.
idea that God brings the right people at a given time to accomplish what he wants to accomplish through that team. And it simply says that our strategy is more important than the individuals. Our strategy is a bigger deal. And so we need to pray every person into existence on this team, or we need to simply figure out a way to be able to push through on this at the expense of the people that we have there. And frankly, for those that can't offer 80 hours a week into this, makes them really feel like they're not doing enough, that they're not actually valuably contributing if they can't do everything.
So really staying busy again, but not necessarily on the right things, or letting the plan be so married to the plan that they're just not able to see the broader, bigger picture in this case, right? To see the real needs
The broader, bigger picture, or the relationships,
or
the
the
people.
relationships more.
The reality is that the plan becomes more important than the people. And when the plan becomes more important than the people, you're not going to be able to accomplish it in a meaningful way. Ultimately, because as you know, we talk about in the conclusion a little bit, God's not going to share his glory. And ultimately, if we believe in our plan so much in our own strategy,
Mm-hmm.
we're saying that we're really smart, smarter than the fact that God brought the people together that he wanted for this season to accomplish what he sees as most important right now.
So will
And
these be the
so
people? Yeah. Will these be the people who, when we some new opportunity comes up, and this is the guy who says, "But we don't have it in the budget this year. We can't do that because we don't have it in the budget. We didn't plan for it."
could be, it could be also that, you know, the idea of, well, if we were going to do that, then we would need three other full-time people in order to
Yeah.
be able to do that well.
Right.
So so then it goes back to this idea of, we don't have that, and that's okay. What can we do, or what should we be doing with the individuals, and how should we be actively listening to others that may not directly be part of the team, but that are on the fringe, that maybe we need to draw into the team, but not make that the primary goal. I see a lot of teams that just say, well, we got to find that person, so our full attention is then on the other things, rather than continuing to stay committed to the people that are there and what can be accomplished through those people.
All right, now help me to distinguish. You recognize that the C's and D's, this is talking about giving grades on an A, B, C, D, F scale, the U.S. scale. And so these are the people that are barely getting by. They're not excelling. They're not totally failing at what they're doing, I guess, if they're making C's and D's, but they're just not excelling. You talk about them being spread so thin because they're just doing things that are not really accomplishing what they ought to be accomplishing. And they're not connecting these things to their goals. Talk to us a little bit more about how this is different from the jack of all teams.
Yeah, these are people that pride themselves on how busy they are.
Okay.
I've worked with some teams, and it really becomes a point of pride for them, as far as the number of programs or the number of hours that they've spent. I literally did a consulting with one team where I just said, okay, I want you to list out the major programs, and we had flip charts, and we had to do it was about six full flip charts of font that was about this big, of them line iteming out everything.
Mm.
um, and for them to try to then go backwards and connect and say, well, why did you do this? It raised a lot of sacred cows. It raised a lot of things that they were committed to because somebody had started at one point, and it would really upset this family if they got rid of that, or and those are real things. but what it puts us in then mentally is the space of I'm going to make sure that I'm always doing things, but it's not connected to something. And ultimately, a lot of times what will happen in this is that what is strategic, what is actually connected and aligned, gets pushed down to the things that are comfortable and the things that we can do easily and the things that we can do quickly. There's a reason why when I have to clean my whole house, I start with folding the clothes and folding towels, not even the other things, because folding the towels is easy and I can see that I'm making progress. And so I'm going to start there. Right. And I'm going to do that. But what happens when we do that on a day-to-day basis with our calendars is that we don't block out the time to do the truly strategic things. We don't do the things that force us to be in the right headspace. And so collectively, when we do that as a team, we get to a place like healthcare right now where our core leaders are spending a lot more time on scheduling than they are out being with their team members, with the other people, and with frankly, with the patients as well. They're spending time in the office doing things that need to get done, but it's really busy work that is distracting, that's taking them away from some of the intentional actions that would align with the overall strategy or focus of the team.
So they need to just go through all the things that they are doing and do some of that start, stop, continue kind of a analysis.
Yeah, so if you look up calendar cleanse, there's a lot of ways that you can do a calendar cleanse, but it's intentionality. It's
Yeah.
beginning to block out time for certain things and not just individually. A calendar cleanse is a pretty individual thing, but doing that collectively as a team. What are the meetings that really aren't adding value? What are the things that we're investing in where it takes a disproportionate amount of time from the results that we're actually seeing. And it's forcing some hard questions to really figure out if these are the right things that we should be doing. Are these the spaces where we see the Lord moving and momentum, and there are people that whose lives are changing, or is it something where we can do it pretty easily, and so why would we take it off of there? It seems to be scratching someone's itch sometimes, so let's keep doing it.
Yeah. I want to come back to that when we get to the 7 steps that every team needs to take, because this last one seems to be the historical marker team, success storyers.
Yeah, when I think of this one, that they're doing some good work, but they chase a story to make it a strategy. And when you chase a story to make it a strategy, you don't usually do a great job of evaluating what actually happened in that story that created the environment, the context in order for that story to work the way that it did. We typically take the story at face value and say, "Great, let's all do that then. Let's all move forward." Right now, we're evaluating a leadership development program inside Providence, and there's one department that is very different than the hospital setting, where it dramatically improved their engagement scores. And so now we have some hospital chief execs that have seen this and have said, we want that program. And they haven't done the due diligence to understand, why did it work within that context? What were the things that actually made it valuable, and how was it implemented in such a way that it actually generated those results? And so these success stories become driven by the story, which is really compelling, and people get excited about that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's usually charismatic leaders that can impact the way that a group will go. And don't get me wrong, stories definitely have a place in all of these things that we're talking about. But when that's the only driver and we don't have the evaluation, we don't have the analysis behind it, then we start shifting too quickly based on isolated events.
Was there anything that could be repeated here? Can we learn from it? What went wrong? We don't do any evaluation then of those wonderful stories that we're telling.
Right, because it seems critical of a story. And why are you going to be critical of a success story? That doesn't seem very nice. we should be nicer to the success story because it was a success story, and we should all just do what that person did.
John, you talked about some steps in each one of these five that you could take specifically with that team, but you then had some seven specific must dos for that every team ought to be looking at to help us all be more productive for the kingdom. Let's just walk through those real quickly, if we might. First, set the shared strategic plan with the spiritual fruit as the outcome. Um, what it's all about, our fruitfulness, is it not?
It, it is. And I think if we can't internally in our team, if we can't draw a solid line back to that spiritual fruit, then we're probably too committed to certain tactics. We're
Mm-hmm.
probably too committed to other measurements, other things. We need to be able to draw a solid line back. Now, when I say a solid line, that doesn't mean that, Larry, you know nothing about my team, and so you as an outsider would come in and see that solid line. I don't need you to be able to do that. I need everyone on our team
Yeah.
that is sharing in this experience to be able to draw that solid line, that they can see how everything that we're doing is connected ultimately toward the goal of spiritual fruit.
The next one, when you say prioritize and sequence, um, why do you put them that way? I mean, the prioritizing of our goals, but also sequencing, you say, is equally important. How is it? How does that work?
So, one of the things that we're all experiencing right now is change fatigue. And the amount of change that's happening at any given time, that there are so many changes that are going on that are all important, that all have to happen. And so we used to just say prioritize, but that's not fair because a lot of the things that we really are going to have to do aren't going to drop off of our prioritized list. They still have to happen. And so the sequencing then becomes as significant as the prioritization. What's important for now? And based on that, then what are the things that will follow that? At what point in this effort that we're doing do we know that it's time to introduce the next thing into it, so that we have this intentional long view of how we're sequencing things out with the prioritization, with understanding where there are dependencies, what's connected to what will be people's sort of threshold of change, how much can they handle at any given time, and really to begin to think about in the prioritization, in the sequencing, focus back on the individuals and the relationships, what's manageable, what will work for this season in order to do that, so that we don't overload. I think of every organization has their culture. Well, in your church culture, to try to add things into December probably doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And so how are we intentional in knowing those rhythms of the 4 weeks before Easter? How are we putting pauses on everything? And how are we reprioritizing, reallocating our efforts to match the cadence of the rhythms of our team or our organization?
Now, this next one then is really hard for some teams because it's hard to define measurements. How do we directly define measurements for success? And then, of course, actually doing it on a regular basis.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's both that's really hard, right? I think sometimes we can define, but our definition of measures becomes so complex that nobody could ever do it. And so even though we've all agreed, oh man, it'd be great if we could understand the number of times that, the door is held open by somebody when they're coming into our church, and somebody doesn't have to open them, that would really let us know if we have a great community where we're caring well for each other. Great, who's going to count it? And are we actually counting it? But I think it's understanding, working backwards from if we're trying to if we're trying to understand the needs of our community, maybe that's a strategic priority for Q1, is just to understand in a new way the needs of our community. Then it might be something as far as, how many different organizations have we actually met with to hear what's important to them right now? How have we connected with the government officials locally to understand what's top of mind for them. How have we connect and so beginning to think through what would show us that we had made progress in a specific area. And it'll take some brainstorming and it'll take some narrowing down. I think, if you're going to try to measure something, you don't measure everything, you measure the thing that best represents what it is that you're trying to get after. So how do you get down to that narrowing of that?
All right, related to that, then once we found the measurement, uh, you put the review and accountability in there. Really, with the measurement and the goals, somewhere in there, we need to know who people are accountable to for reaching their goals, right? And closely connected to that is the review. Uh, I think a lot of teams, because the organization says they have to, they only do an annual performance review, and that's where everything gets done, which means in reality it never gets done, right? So, how do you help a team to self monitor, to put in the accountability factor, and to build in that rhythm or cadence of consistently reviewing what they've been doing and making their adjustments accordingly?
Yeah, it goes back to how committed are we to actually moving the dial together. I think this is where if we don't do this piece, if we don't have the consistent review and accountability, then we allow ourselves to make little adjustments and to get off course, but we don't know it. We don't
Yeah.
know that we're not in lockstep if we don't have a way that we're actually connecting. I left this one open for a reason. If I were inside our environment, then yes, because we're a more hierarchical organization, and so who you're accountable to is pretty defined. It's your core leader. In a lot of our groups, though, we're having to create a shared accountability. We're having to create a shared space to where we've given each other permission. And this is where it goes back up into all the different relational components that we've talked about. Because if we don't have that type of relationship and we try to get to a space of accountability, it's going to feel forced. It's going to feel like the shoulds and the oughts. It's not going to feel empowering, which is really what this should feel like. By the time we're here at that consistent conversation around it, the accountability, even though that's a strong word, it's really, hey, what's going on? How is that going? How can we support you in that? And how is your team doing? It's really a life-giving experience to help someone be accountable to something that they are passionate about, because really you're showing that you care enough that you're asking the questions and really digging in with them.
Now, explain to me a little bit more then about this concept of cascading connections for
It
every team member. What do you mean by that?
this is can I as a janitor understand how me emptying the trash connects to more people coming to know Jesus? And and it's really them
Mm-hmm.
understand, it's them feeling so connected to what we're saying that we're going to do, that I can go from from the organizational goal of more people knowing Jesus to saying that, part of what we want to do is we want people to feel welcome when they come into our space as one strategy. And so when people feel welcome in our space, then what's true of that? Well, what's true of that then for our welcome team is that they're proactively stepping out and connecting people. For our facilities team, that means that they're creating an environment that is clean and people feel like they're welcome. And if that facilities team then drops down and says, okay, we want to make sure that we don't have light bulbs out, so switching that light bulb is an act that will lead people to Jesus. That sort of connection, that sort um, of commitment to what we're doing together, and them being able to draw the line from a light bulb to an experience to an opportunity for them to receive the message, from them to respond to that message. When we can help them track that all the way back to the most menial of tasks in our mind, they no longer become menial tasks. They then become opportunities for me to use my passion, my gifting, my service, even though it's not evangelism, to actually do this. And we talk again, Grit Berkman comes into play here because this is where every gift is so important. And the way that we use those gifts is so important. And we must learn to not prioritize gifting, but rather help everyone understand how they're contributing to the whole of where our team or organization is going.
All right, that word prioritize, because you come back to it again in number 6. Prioritize the work and do it. How is this different from number 2, prioritize and sequence?
This is really the implement. It's the get it done. It's the, a lot of times we talk about things, and especially in accomplishing strategic planning and thinking about what we're going to do. This is make your calendar reflect what needs to get done and then do what's on your calendar. It's that sort of connection. This is very much the action side of it. That a lot of times for those that like to brainstorm, that like to come up, and for the record, I fall into that category. I like to think about the ideas. I like to think about
Uh-huh.
new ways of doing things, but to put your head down and to actually implement the things, to actually do what we're saying we're going to do, it's a discipline, and it's not always easy, but it has to happen.
And then finally, evaluate, analyze, and adjust, going back to number 3 with the defining the associated measurements, how those are related.
Yeah, this is that no plan is so fail proof that we don't need to adjust off of it. And really, that adjustment then isn't based on how we're feeling on a given day or the fact that it didn't go well one week. Instead, it's that we're beginning to really evaluate why did it not work? What is it that isn't working about that? And what adjustments or what tweaks could we make? But frankly, at times it could also be, what do we need to stop doing? The idea of failing fast only works when you're evaluating enough to know that it didn't work well. And so what are those measures then for you to be able to identify that it didn't work so that you can adjust?
Hey, John, I want to give the last portion of our time to any questions or comments that people on the call might have. Um, Coming to you as a group, thinking of your own coaching challenges that you might have with some of these 5 failing types of teams, or the 7 steps that you absolutely must take to help a team to be more productive. And I know there were a couple of comments or questions in the chat there, but I'd like to ask you to turn your mics on and share those with us personally, if you will. And this is the time to unmute and either share a comment or ask a question of John, or of the group for that matter. If you have something you'd like to throw out to the group with any situation you've got that you'd like to get some counsel from them, this is a perfect opportunity to do that. Terry, I see you're unmuting there.
Yes.
Go ahead, brother.
Oh.
Yeah, I want you. Yeah, see, I tricked you. I said unmute. And I know you've got some things going on there with China outreach ministries that ought to be related to some of what we've been talking today.
Well, just to give a brief summary of what China Outreach is all about. China Outreach Ministries has been in an outreach ministry to Chinese scholars for the last 55 years. In a very more defined way in the last 30 years, beginning with campus ministry. Currently, actually before COVID, there were over 400,000 Chinese scholars studying here in the United States. Since COVID, that has been reduced drastically. And so the primary focus of outreach ministry has been with undergraduate students. And they come here today in a much more less needy mindset than the previous generation. So it's created a tremendous difference in strategy and whatever in reaching that population. COM began in Pittsburgh with one staff at the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University. And it has grown over those last 30 years. Now we have Depends on who you talk to. We have between 55 and 57 full-time campus workers. And this has been what I call kind of a hodgepodge in leadership. We've not really had teams. And my wife and I have been involved in member care for the last, it'll be 18 years. And we really observed the need for team ministry. And I'm not going to go into detail, but our president, Daniel Sue, has asked me to be a part of leadership development. And that's how I connected with Larry and Susan and got involved in Grip Berkman. The last, actually, it began in 2018 when I did certification training and whatever, and then we began the process of putting our entire organization into areas. And we have 7 specific areas throughout the United States with, there are groups of campus staff. So my goal in this process is to introduce Grip Berkman to all of our staff, full-time staff and spouses who are interested. So this began, I worked with the West Coast team beginning January 2020. And at that point, COVID began and we shut down for 2 years. So we were able to pick this up, and last 2 weekends ago, we finished the last team build with our southeastern area. So our primary goal right now is, now that all of the teams are in place, is to all future new candidates with COM will be introduced to the Grip Berkman. And then that information will be transferred to the area teams for implementation in that particular area, according to gift relations and so on and so forth. My main concern right now being our area directors, who are going to be following through on developing the team structure. And so I'm very interested in what what you're offering right now in the team values. I have a major meeting with all of our area directors in April, and I want to begin to talk about some of these team values that you're introducing. So that's kind of my goal at this point.
Hey, John, what would we say to somebody like Terry that's on the cusp of really helping an organization to actually start forming teams? In this case, maybe not history with any of these other failures, but helping them to start off right as they're really trying to build teams.
Yeah, that's what, yes, I agree. That's what I want.
Yeah, I think where my mind goes initially, it's going a lot of directions, Terry, but where my mind initially goes is you have a clear vision. That's really important, right? When you're trying to bring people together, it sounds like you have that. The second one then is to evaluate the people and to, which sounds weird, but to really understand the individuals in such a way that you understand what are they bringing to the table, who are those individuals that the Lord has already provided, and based on those individuals, then rather than blanketing out a strategy, how would a strategy be different if you just started with the people rather than starting with the strategic intent, and where might that shape things a little bit differently? So So especially at the formation on the front end of sort of a redesign or a relaunch into a new space, that would be my strongest recommendation, is as opposed to knowing exactly how it's going to happen, really evaluating those individuals and having conversations to see where they feel passion and energy and motivation in a certain direction.
John, you mentioned the word vision, and the word's been thrown around out there for the last 30, 40 years, and talking about visionary leaders and teams having to have a vision and organizations having to have a vision, and how vision and mission and purpose and all of that come together. But at the end of the day, thinking of vision as being looking out to the future and being able to describe what the future will look like. So how could you help a team to perhaps sit down and define what will success really look like? If we are going to be successful at what we've said we're going to do, what will we have accomplished when we get to wherever it is in time?
I would start with the spiritual fruit first, right? What
Good.
is the fruit of what we're getting at? So be clear on that this is what the spiritual fruit is. And then I love personally, the tool that we use most often is just a backwards imaging. If we were outrageously successful 3 years from now, what would have happened? Describe it to me. We're throwing the party right now. What's our party about, and who's at our party? And then you can actually take that a step further and say, what are the barriers that we had to overcome in the past 3 years so that we could be having this party right now, celebrating the success that we had, and begin to even problem solve for some of those barriers where, hey, we had to do a major shift because for a season nobody was allowed to come to the US anymore, and yet we didn't want to stop our ministry. So how did we handle that? Well, what we did is we started thinking about virtual, and actually we had teams that went there as opposed to them coming to us, and you begin to spark some creativity around that. But you have to stop at some point and say, okay, so if this is what we're after, this is where we are, then based on those individuals, what part of the story are you in? Where do you see yourself? And it's exciting typically when we've done exercises like this, then individuals begin to start seeing how their unique contribution truly isn't unique, but that the Lord has someone that's overlapping with that. And I very rarely find that the Lord is really going to place someone on an island, even within an organization. There's typically going to be at least someone else that gets excited about it or is passionate about something similar, so that you can at least have two or three moving together in a direction.
So in a case like this, let's say the team is looking out to the future and they're describing this future, and maybe take them through an exercise of let's write the history as if it has already happened. We're really writing prophecy to a certain extent, but here are the things. If we take that exercise that you talked about, we would be saying, here are the things that we did. I heard you saying, working our way backwards from that end result that we're approaching, and now it brings us to the present. So what are the things that we need to do, which translates also to what are the things that I need to do as part of a team.
And understanding that that's where you have to be careful with the shoulds and oughts,
Yeah.
right? That's not going to drive us. What's going to drive us is the end vision and the individuals that we have here to begin our trajectory that direction.
So it does help us to get a strategic plan that we're going to follow, but we're going to hold on to that, not really with an iron fist, but we are going to be following that plan and making adjustments along the way as we evaluate and do our periodic evaluations, right?
People talk like who they are, right? So typically people aren't going to come up with ideas that they have no interest or desire in actually talking about or pursuing. They're typically going to talk like from who they are. And so that then gives you added insight into those individuals, into where they're thinking that things need to happen.
Yeah. Someone else on the call, do we have any other questions or comments that someone wanted to make? Les, I want to come back to a comment that you made while everyone else is still thinking about theirs, because you asked that question, is it possible to be too we-focused? You want to expound on that just a little bit, Les?
Yeah, I just think of my Grip Berkman journey here. before I met you all, my focus was helping each individual become the best they could be.
Hmm.
And then I started journeying with you, and I realized, well, our value is when we come together. And as I was reading through this article and thinking through some of the teams I'm actually walking with, we become so insulated as a team, we, that the rest, because the we is much bigger than just us, gets lost. And so it is possible, I guess, to be so narrowly focused on a smaller we that we lose the fruit. Because the kingdom's bigger than any team I'm going to be part of.
Okay, two things hit me, and John, I want you to comment on this too. Two things hit me. Number one, we don't cease to be I when we are part of the we.
Yep.
You know, and so I do still have my part to contribute, and I still need to keep growing in my self-awareness as well as my social awareness. But the other thing is thinking of us. You touched on it there, I think, Les, that we are also part of larger groups of we. We are there's the larger group of. If we're thinking in terms of the church, the worldwide church, the global church, the eternal church that we are a part of. And so we don't want to be so focused on us and our group that we lose that perspective as well. John, something else you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think, Les, what can happen is even from a grip perspective, we start with the I, we move to the we and team styles, but we never get to the they of the bodybuilding roles.
Yeah.
And to make that complete, to finish out the triangle, we can't stop at the we. And what happens when we stop at the we is that in some ways we're opening ourselves up to become Pharisees, that all of a sudden the rightness of the we exceeds the needs of the others, of the people that we're no longer reaching and connecting to.
Wow, that's super important too, isn't it? Otherwise, we will have missed the mark, and we will have had a really wonderful time and had some wonderful coffee and donuts, but we won't have met the real goal of hearing the well done, good and faithful servant, will we? Someone else with another comment, question, something that jumped out as you as important, or something that maybe was a little bit cloudy, or maybe even you wanted to have an opposing thought? Yeah, David and Laura, I see you and Mike.
Yeah, I don't know that it's an opposing thought, but John, I appreciated the pictures of the different teams. I think I've witnessed those along the way. You address it with what appears to be the we solution, but could you speak a bit to how the team leader, because sometimes the team leader can be the contributor to the issue, to the problem.
Yeah.
So could you maybe give an insight to how would you address it differently if it becomes fairly apparent that the team's ready to be aligned, move forward, et cetera, but the team leader's not there yet?
Yeah, that's tough. And it is a process to help them understand that. And I think, as with anything, they have to come to that experience themselves. And so as outsiders, our role is really to facilitate that conversation, facilitate them understanding that, and asking enough questions with the group present that the team leader has to listen in a different way. I think the idea of a safe space in that, to have that conversation, is probably the most challenging thing. Right now, one of the assessments that we have a team working on is discerning direction together. And probably more so than anything that we've ever done within our I2E community, the need for a team leader to be humble and to be open to listening is so fundamental to that. And so if the leader isn't willing to listen, I don't know how to help you, because I think that's foundational, that they have to be willing to actually listen to coaching. Now, if there is a crack in the door of, well, I'm committed to this strategic plan and this is the right thing to do, then you can start with questions of, how has your team influenced that? How has your team shaped the way that you're thinking right now? How have you valued them for that? What is different in your strategy because your team contributed to it in a unique way? And obviously those questions are if they're so committed to a specific path, but you could do the same with the Navel Gazers. Well, how have you asked your community about this? I think it's really the teachability, and in order to get to the teachability, you're going to need the relationship where somebody is a trusted voice to them that can crack their own mental framing. And I'll give you an example. Even, I was in a meeting yesterday with my own team that I have a super high level of trust with, but I've been really close to a project, and they started what to me felt like critiquing. It wasn't really critiquing, they were trying to understand it, but I had to check my posture because I realized I was becoming defensive of something that we haven't even launched. And so it's really that check as far as how are you posing, how are you presenting yourself, and what is your own ability to lean back and to accept feedback. How has that worked? Where do you find that you're most able to hear that? What environments? And begin to have some of those conversations that that enable true conversations to happen where the team leader can feel comfortable. I think this is one where you can honor the team leader's needs and say, hey, for you to get good feedback from your team, how does it need to come? For you to effectively listen, how do they need to approach you? And to begin to get at that information, because then as team members try that, if the team leader doesn't respond well, then as an outside coach, you can come back and say, you would ask them to do this. It seems like that happened. Let's reflect on that. Why was it still challenging for you? Why weren't we able to take that in that way? But I think starting with how self-aware are they, and again, Grit Berkman gives us some great language for that, some great opportunities. But that teachability is probably the first thing. Are they open to actually the team contributing to their thinking?
Thanks,
Thinking
John.
to the Berkman, I'm thinking of a couple of the insights reports that we have, like biggest mistakes you can make with me, and for that team leader to look at that report for themselves, but also to look at that for their team members, to think about how they're communicating, to say, hey, here are some things that we want to avoid, and that might help to see some hot spots or some hot buttons that I might have that I want to try and avoid to keep people from hitting those hot buttons. Listen, we are at the top of the hour again. I can't believe it, John, because this has been so much fun. I think we could have gone on for another couple, but we're not going to do that. What I would like for you to do, though, is take just a minute and look at those last 3 evaluative statements for us, and just kind of walk through those quickly, if you would, to tell us how a team or a team leader could use those evaluative statements as we're trying to help them move forward from wherever they are to the next steps. So as you look at those, each team member contributes toward the team's desired results, outcomes. The team has mutually defined outcomes, results, and strategies to attain and evaluate them. And the body of Christ is growing as a result of our work. John, how would we use those 3 statements productively in a team setting?
I think it's a progression. I think these 3 statements really help us understand, does the individual feel like they're contributing to the greater good? Ask the question, say, have the one-on-one conversation. Well, how do you see yourself fitting with where we're headed? What's meaningful to you about this organization and your part in the organization as we're moving forward? And you'll really get an understanding of, am I a cog in a wheel, or am I actually valuably contributing to the outcomes that we're doing? That's the second one, is, has the team actually invested in this process together? Like, are you sitting down to evaluate how you're doing what you're doing and what you're actually doing in moving forward? And really that can be as simple as, show me your meeting cadence and how you're staying connected to your team, and I can probably give you a good sense of if this is happening or not. So as team leaders and those that are working, this is one where I wouldn't take an answer on this one. I would ask for evidence on this one. Show me the meetings, show me what happens in those meetings that would give me evidence of this, rather than what you believe to be true. That probably goes back, David, to some of those observable behaviors, to really, what am I seeing? Not what are you feeling? What are other people experiencing? What am I able to observe as an outsider that would convince me of this? And the last one then is, ultimately, if we've defined spiritual fruit, are we seeing it or are we not? And ultimately, I think that consistently has to be a question that we're asking: is have we defined spiritual fruit, and are we seeing the spiritual fruit in our teams and organizations?
John, I so appreciate that you have brought us back to remind us that the ultimate goal is fruitfulness, that we are supposed to be fruitful for the kingdom and see that spiritual fruit growing and multiplying because of what we are doing in building unity in the body of Christ. It brings us back to John 15:8. This is the way that my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove yourselves to be my disciples. The way we prove that we are really on track and being disciples is that we can point to the fruit that is being brought to the kingdom, and it grows from fruit to more fruit and much fruit, and that's how God is glorified. Well, folks, we've come to the end of another great hour. Thank you so much for your participation, John, and those of you that have asked questions, and those of you that have been out there with us participating and listening. I could see that you were taking notes. Thanks a lot for that. I want to remind you that we are setting this up. We post it on YouTube with the Grip Berkman Coaches Cafe YouTube channel. It'll be out there within about 24 hours. And we also have a reduced edited version of this that we're putting out as a podcast now. And I've got a feeling that there was so much in that first session, John, that we might divide this one up into 2 or 3. The podcast is also on just about every podcast platform that you can have. That way you can speed it up if you want to and listen to it when you're in the car. And please don't try to read the article as you're driving, but you can also read the article and follow along with us as you're seeing that. The articles are always posted there on the Grip Berkman website. So folks, thanks again for joining us. John, thank you very much for stimulating conversation and a lot of thought, a lot of food for thought, for future thought. And folks, just keep doing what you can to build unity in the body of Christ that will be fruitful for him so that more people will know Jesus. Bye-bye now.